Welcome to the STEM Talk podcast, your 30-minute monthly STEM pulse check. Hosted by the Afterschool STEM Hub, STEM Education Coalition, and STEM Ecosystems by TIES. The STEM Talk podcast creates a safe space for dialogue while maintaining a focus on information that matters to you and the communities you serve. In just 30 minutes each month, join our experts from across the STEM landscape as they provide factual information, practical strategies, and actionable resources to help you navigate the ever-changing world of STEM education, workforce development, policy, and advocacy. Welcome to episode number 2, Translating Policy into Action. Hi, my name is Jenny Frank, and I'm the director of the STEM Ecosystems Initiative powered by TIES. Today, we're welcoming back our expert guests, James Brown, Executive Director of the STEM Education Coalition, and Della Cronin, Principal at Bose Public Affairs Group. They'll be providing some critical insights on new STEM priorities and offering strategic guidance for navigating the current advocacy landscape. James brings his valuable perspective at the intersection of science and policy. Della continues to contribute her extensive experience in shaping federal education initiatives. Together, they'll help us to understand how to translate recent policy developments into actionable strategies. James, Della, thank you again for being here with us. We are always grateful for your continued expertise as we work together to strengthen STEM nationwide. Let's begin our conversation.
About a month ago, the president wrote a letter to the new director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Michael Kratsios, outlining a number of priorities around the ecosystem of top talent related to science and technology. And we've actually got a link to that in the presentation here, and in the chat, you can find Mr. Kratsios' response to the president, where he laid out a number of priorities around science and technology issues in particular. But what's notable in that conversation is that they're talking around the issue of STEM education in the sense that, they talked about all the needs for science and technology expertise and all of the needs for investments in American competitiveness, but they're sort of dancing around the issue of STEM education in general. And we've been told they are intending on laying out more of a STEM strategy later in the year, but we haven't seen any of that yet. But I point this out because I expect to see some further details from the administration in terms of how they're going to explore their strategy for science and technology in the same way they've done some things on energy. They use the term energy abundance, and in the science and technology realm, they use terms like competitiveness and dominance in the global technology world. So we can expect to see more of these type of announcements coming out of this new OSTP over the next several months. The second example is not as positive. So you may have seen in the news of the last week that the National Science Foundation has published a number of notices regarding the termination of grants that, quote, no longer align with its priorities. There are a number of announcements on the NSF website. The total of these cancellations so far is something like $230 million across 400 or so grants. Many of these grants are within the office of the Directorate for STEM Education within the National Science Foundation. These are stemming from the executive actions previous in the administration around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and things monitoring usage of the internet and misinformation, disinformation, things of that character. But there's an FAQ on the NSF's website that explains this. It explains what it means for the canceled grantees, what they can expect in the future. And NSF also has a notice up there that's at the bottom of these slides, and you'll get these so you can respond to them. Asking for people to share stories about the impact and of investments in the NSF over time in honoring the 75th anniversary of the National Science Foundation. So again, we're going to see a lot of mixed news like this. The science agencies aren't going away, certainly, but that's not what it feels like when your grant gets canceled. And, that's certainly, something we are tracking and trying to keep people informed so that they can see these things in real time and have opportunities to respond like the ones that are below. Della?
So another thing that's happened that's, on its face to the casual observer might not seem something that is directly related to STEM world and STEM advocates, but the White House issued an executive order that eliminated a number of agencies, including the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And that executive order resulted in almost the immediate decision to put staff of about 70 employees at IMLS on administrative leave. The new director put out a statement that, the work of the IMLS will be focused on patriotism and core national values. But of course, the STEM community reacted to this decision with a great deal of concern, given its reliance on museums, science centers, other informal learning spaces that are important to identify and nurture interest in STEM education, particularly in non-traditional educational settings, places where students, who might struggle with math suddenly find other connections with STEM to be quite exciting in these venues. So as a community, we're quite concerned about this decision. The American Library Association, of course, has reacted quite strongly against this decision. They've put together a Show Up for Our Libraries campaign that allows you and others to voice your concern with lawmakers, weigh in with stories about the importance of these institutions. And they've also put together an FAQ that sort of details what the executive order means, practically who it affects, and other information important to those who are concerned about these decisions. I would mention that the American Association of Museums has done a similar effort, and if you're looking for additional resources, you might want to look them up as well, and others. These are not the only groups who are voicing concern, but some good resources for those looking for outlets to weigh in. The other thing that happened that, again, is not immediately, obviously, related to STEM education is, but happened in the same executive order as the IMLS one, is a significant cut to AmeriCorps. And AmeriCorps does lots of different things. It houses lots of different kinds of programs, but the one that seemed to be almost immediately gutted is the National Civilian Community Corps, which engages about 2,000 young adults every year in disaster relief and other community service programs. They work in educational settings. A lot of programs rely on them. And also it's a back and forth. Not only do the programs benefit, but the individuals who volunteer suddenly discover they like teaching or engaging with young people, or they want to pursue those kinds of passions. So it certainly is a program that's important to STEM education and STEM education advocates. This sends a signal to us and others that the budget request that we're expecting from the White House this month, next month, or the month after, they're a bit fuzzy on the timeline, could propose more drastic reductions, not only to AmeriCorps, but the overall Corporation for National Community Service. And we and others will be keeping our eyes on that. There are a number of folks who are not pleased about these decisions and have put together advocacy campaigns, including public allies. And then also there are legal challenges to this executive order and many others. And Governor Newsom from California is launching a legal challenge against this one in particular. So that's a quick, that just certainly doesn't cover everything that's happened since the last time we were all together, but some important developments for the STEM education world and things that you all can do to voice your opinion on them.
Thank you so much, James and Della. Next, we have expert guest Dr. Anita Krishnamurthi, Senior Vice President for STEM and Youth Civic Engagement at the Afterschool Alliance, and Leslie Brooks, Afterschool STEM Hub Manager. Together, they'll provide critical insights on expanding STEM through after-school programs and offer strategic guidance for strengthening advocacy efforts in this vital space. Anita brings her valuable perspective as an astrophysicist who has dedicated her career to informal STEM learning. Leslie contributes her experience in policy and advocacy work to advance after-school STEM initiatives. Together, they'll help us to understand how to translate the current policy developments into meaningful opportunities, especially for youth engagement. Anita and Leslie, thank you for joining us today. We're always grateful for your continued expertise as we work together to expand STEM beyond the traditional classroom. Let's begin our next conversation.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and hi, everyone. So glad you could join us. You just heard about all the issues that we're grappling with around STEM education, and it's definitely not the time to sit back, but to mobilize and advocate for our issue. And so my colleague Leslie and I will offer some concrete advocacy tools and tips in our section here. And while, of course, we work at the After School Alliance and what we say focuses on after school, a lot of what we will describe and offer to you as resources can be really applied more broadly as well. So just first of all, we'd like to think of you, we'd like you to think of us at the After School Alliance and the After School STEM Hub, which is a project of the After School Alliance, as your go-to resource for support around after school STEM advocacy. If you don't know us, the Alliance is a national advocacy group for after school programs, and we work to ensure that all children and youth have access to affordable quality after school programs. And in addition to the advocacy work we do with lawmakers and other influential folks at the grass tops, we have a really deep reach into the grassroots of the fields with our mailing lists reaching more than 23,000 program providers. And we work with statewide after school networks in all 50 states, as well as 200 after school ambassadors at the local level. And a lot of what we do is really built around communications research, policy, and capacity building. So I think it's an understatement to say that we're in challenging times. So it's really important for us to equip ourselves with the knowledge and skills to inform our advocacy. And we also need to learn about effective advocacy practices. So I'll start by talking a little about bigger picture advocacy for after school as an example to show how to do advocacy well. And then Leslie will dive into some of our after school STEM specific tools and tips when I finish. So first of all, to be an effective advocate, you need data to make your case. And so this slide shows results from a voter poll that the After School Alliance conducted last year. And what you see is that there's really great public support for after school programs. So as an advocate, this is definitely a data point you should use for making the case for your work. The next thing is we asked voters what they value about after-school STEM programs, and voters value the skills that these programs offer kids, and these are all skills that STEM programs definitely offer. They really value the skills like teamwork, communications, problem solving, and the opportunity to do hands-on work and to work on real-world applications. And of course, we all know that there's a priority on the economy and workforce for both voters and policymakers, and that definitely works in the STEM education community's favor. There's also a 26-year longitudinal study of youth who went through after-school programs, and it showed that youth in these programs as adults had built really strong work skills, had higher levels of education, and got better jobs as adults. And STEM programs are even more beneficial in these realms. So definitely all talking points that we should be using. And the one thing I do want to note about the poll that was interesting, this voter poll that was interesting, was it showed that talking about developing skills and having access to experiences, including internships and apprenticeships, landed better than focusing on careers alone. The next bit of data to just make you aware of is our America After 3 p.m. research data that shows the value parents place on STEM and after school. And this increase that you see between 2014 and 2020 is the largest of all the increases we saw among the various program activities and supports that were asked about in the survey. We also know from our America After 3 data that 75% of young people in after-school programs have access to some sort of STEM learning opportunities. And we have a ton of data, including how it splits out by state and demographics on our AA3 dashboards on our website. We're back out in the field for our 2025 America After 3 p.m. survey now. This will be the 5th iteration of this, and it'll give us a baseline of about 20 years from the time we first started to this. But you see here that the importance of STEM in after school really grew very significantly between 2014 and 2020. So this is the first point I wanted to make, is that knowing the data points is really important to have in your toolkit for advocacy. We have a ton of data on the supports and benefits and impacts of after school and STEM learning and after school programs on our website. It's all freely available for you to use as you need. So what can we do? Afterschool has really strong bipartisan support among policymakers and voters, and a lot of that support can be attributed to decades of work developing stories, messages, messengers, research, relationship building, and information sharing. And so we've learned how to really mobilize the field and gather all the data to beat back a lot of the cuts and consolidations and elimination threats that Afterschool has faced repeatedly over the years. So this is a time to really tap into your data, the networks you have, and the relationships you have to mobilize and start fighting for the programs. And one of the most effective things that you can really do is to invite lawmakers and the media into your programs to showcase the power and value of programs. Seeing young people engaged in STEM activities is really powerful, and it's very hard for people to deny the benefit and impact that has on youth when they see it for themselves. Invite your representatives in Congress and their staff to come visit your program. You really don't need to get the member of Congress themselves there. Having one of their staff join can be incredibly powerful. And our site visit toolkit that's linked on the slide here will help you each step of the way, from preparing and planning to drafting invitations to following up after a great visit. And the Afterschool Alliance also hosts a grassroots celebration of Afterschool every year called Lights on Afterschool. It's another opportunity for you to really showcase what's going on in a program. The next thing is, of course, we are a policy and advocacy group. So we advocate for investments and supportive policies by working directly with lawmakers and by helping your voices reach our nation's leaders. Gathering stories of impacts are really, really important. Ask families to email Congress. You can include a note in your emails or on your social media posts asking families to contact Congress. You can provide draft postcards or letters. Have templates that families can fill out with a personal note and their information, and you can deliver these to the local offices of your congressional representatives. And a pro tip, consider making it fun, run a contest or set a goal and provide a prize around the number of letters that are collected or sent. And the final thing I'll touch on is, of course, social media. Go where the people are, see who it is you're trying to influence. And reach and use all the tools that are available and available to you and that's convenient for you. And what I've described so far has been big picture and can be really applied very broadly across a range of programs in different settings. So definitely check out the Afterschool Alliance website to see what resources, research, and templates we have for you to use. And I'll turn it over to Leslie now to speak about some specific after-school STEM tools that we have for you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Anita. Yes, so I help manage our After-School STEM Hub, which is an initiative of the After-School Alliance, and we're a coalition of organizations working at the intersection of policy, research, and practice, advocating for increased investment in after-school STEM. And we want to be a resource for you. So part of that involves developing tools and other resources you can use in making the case for after-school STEM and its value for STEM learning and for society at large. So one of the things that we have on our website that's accessible to you is our STEM advocacy toolkit. And it has 3 different sections: prepare, engage, and mobilize. And you'll find different resources in each one. On the prepare page, you can find talking points and messaging tips. On the engage page, you'll find downloadable graphics. And on the mobilize page, you'll find sample presentations and communication tools for various audiences. And so just to give you an example of something you'll see on the prepare page, we have language tips, where we had worked with the Frameworks Institute a few years ago to provide and it includes samples of what you'll, so like positive messaging tips that research has showed that is appealing to wide audiences and across political spectrums. And so you'll see that on this Say This, Not That, and then on the previous messaging tips page. And then on the Engage page, you can find video graphics, like the example of this one that's going to play right now, that you can download, you can share on social media, you can share in emails with policymakers or other funders, and just the general public as well. And then on our Mobilize page, you'll find some documents and resources that can, such as like a STEM fact sheet and after school elevator pitches and sample newspaper editorials that you can adapt for your own unique circumstances to help make the case for after school STEM and increasing in STEM education and learning opportunities for all youth. So you can use these QR codes to access our website. We also have a LinkedIn page where you can follow us for updated webinars, research briefs, opportunities in policy and different legislation we're following, and just to stay engaged. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much to our panel today and our expert voices. We really appreciate it. And believe it or not, we have 8 minutes remaining for Q&A, which I will be honest, all of us are quite surprised by. So I think the first question that seems to be on everybody's mind in all of our networks is that, you know, obviously funding from federal and state sources are definitely in question. There's a lot of uncertainty around there. What advice do you have for our STEM organizations, people who are doing programs and initiatives to support young people? What advice do you have for them as to other sources where they can start to differentiate their funding opportunities or seek out new ones?
I'll go first, Jenny. You know, I think a couple of themes that resonate with this administration or anything that builds stuff in the United States, right? I mean, I'm trying not to oversimplify that, but I think, you know, learning about what's going on in economic development and learning what's going on that's sort of tied to industry in your area are probably some of the touch points that I would want to think about as I'm looking at federal grants. You know, the other thing I would say is, you know, one of the questions we get a lot is, should we even still be applying to federal grants? And my answer to that is an enthusiastic yes, because I think a lot of people are going to self-censor and not realize that there are still dollars out there for most of the purposes that we're dealing with. And, you know, I say again, these cuts are really painful when they land on your organization. We get that. But within the envelope of NSF funding, we're talking about a pretty small percentage at this point, right? And so I think keeping the work of your organization going by going after the areas where you have strategic competence that lines up with the grants that are out there is absolutely something that people should be doing. Now, the last thing we want to do is sort of be cowed away from you know, exercising our rights as citizens right now. And one of those rights is to apply for federal grants where they're available.
How do you navigate when advocating for your values jeopardizes your funding sources?
I think that was one of the reasons that we wanted to show some of our language tip sheets, is that you can do a lot of the same work if you can talk about it differently a lot of the time. I'm not going to say that it works every single time, but if you keep in mind that there are certain audiences that you want to work with, or populations you want to work with, or certain kinds of issues you want to work with, I think it's trying to figure out how to make it land in a way that cuts across a lot of the political divides. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice is and you know, and at some level, there are states in our union that have had to do this for a long time, even before this year, right? And so I think maybe talking to some of your colleagues who might be in more conservative states to see how they've been coping with some of this and asking what language they use would be a good way to start. James or Della, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'll just add that to build on Anita's point, for those of you who have been working in this space for a while, we did see as a community sort of a criticisms leveled at social and emotional learning over the last 5-ish years that required programs and others to pivot about how they were talking about that work in a way that skirted some of the concerns that folks on the right had about that issue. And I think as a community, we're doing that. We're similarly doing that. I think we are pivoting to language like success for all, or we need as many people in the STEM workforce as we can get, no matter who they are. And we have to figure out how to reach everybody. I think those are some of the things that we're learning about and learning how to do better, more effectively in real time. I don't know, James, if you have other counsel.
Well, the other thing I'd add to this is, one of the questions that we'll get sometimes is, what do I do if I have an initiative that's targeted at underrepresented communities? For example, an NSF has, a broadening participation mandate as part of applying for a grant. And what does that mean? Well, I think one of the easiest ways to answer that is where the line is really clear is that you're no longer allowed under the executive orders of this administration to apply for grants or receive funding for things that only target certain communities and are not available to all. But it doesn't mean that you can't be inclusive with your inclusive initiatives in the sense that, if you have a community you're serving, make sure it's available to the whole community, but you can still put emphasis in places where you get less of a response or where you feel like there's more need. You just need to make sure it's not perceived as being exclusionary of anyone. And so that's a different issue for a scholarship program, for example, that's only available to people of color than it is for an enrichment initiative that where you're trying to make sure it's available for the entire community.
And the thing I'll add to that, right, is that if you're designing your program to serve a particular community, design it for that community, right? Because even if other folks join in, who may know, if you're targeting young people of color or girls, as long as it's really inclusive and designed with their needs in mind, then your goal of making sure that there's a welcoming environment for them is still met, even if young people from other communities participate in that program.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer. I think to round out our last 2 minutes, if it's okay, I'd like to ask each of the guests to tell me something that's top of their mind right now with regards to some of the things that we've been talking about today, and maybe a little piece of advice. So I'm going to go in order of presentation. So I'll start with you, James. Oh, it was James. Yes.
Oh, I was hoping to go last. I wanted to hear from Leslie.
Okay.
First.
All right, Leslie, you're on.
I guess my main piece of advice is to, depending on what role you play, like get out there and experience the joy and the importance of STEM education and learning for our youth, and hear from them about why they care about what they're learning and how they feel it impacts their lives. I had the pleasure of visiting an after-school program yesterday, and it was just a delight being with the youth. And we were blessed to be able to invite a staff member in a representative's office. And so just being able to share that with everyone can encourage folks to remember the why and that they're there, and then to take action from that.
Anita?
I guess I would say stay the course. And also following up with what Leslie said, sorry, the thought flew out of my head, but I'll just say sort of stay the course and keep doing the great work. Oh, I know what it is. Talk to your community, right? Like, because especially if you're doing community-based programming, your biggest source of support and your champions are the folks you're working with. So make sure that you are serving their needs and you have them join in advocating for continuing the programming that is serving them.
Della?
So my answer is way more policy specific. So I have been watching very closely what's going on with AI in education. And this administration, particularly from the White House proper, has been very interested in AI and what it means in terms of workforce needs, workforce preparation, all of the above. And I think that we'll see some activity from the White House very soon on that point. So keep your eyes open. Just to follow up on the hearing that happened in the House just recently that covered, I think, very well and very cordially and bipartisanly the many complicated issues that are around AI and its potential for education and educators.
James, round us out.
I saw a comment about something that happened at the Illinois State Capitol and the STEM work that they do there. That might have been the same event I was at a couple of weeks ago. And I'll echo something Leslie said, which is, at the end of the day, most of our democracy happens locally. And if you're not engaged in what's going on in your community, if you've never been to your state capitol, you've never been to a school board meeting, start there. That's how you get informed about what's going on in your community. And, you can also weigh in with folks in Congress too. Anita gave you a lot of tools for that. But, if you're troubled by what's going on, don't stew, do something about it. And you have plenty of options for doing something about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of the STEM Talk. It is a podcast, and we will be sharing that podcast, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and actually anywhere you get your podcast. We hope that the insights and strategies that were shared today by our expert voices and our guests will help you and your organization to navigate the current advocacy landscape with a little more confidence. So remember, put these ideas into practice as you continue your important work in advancing STEM in your communities. This presentation has been brought to you by the STEM Education Coalition, the Afterschool STEM Hub, and STEM Ecosystem. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
To learn more about the work of STEM Education Coalition, Afterschool STEM Hub, and STEM Ecosystems, please visit our websites. Until next time, keep advocating for a strong STEM education and workforce nationwide.